Hello everyone. Over 200 years ago, in the early days of the American Republic, Alexis de Tocqueville, a visiting French statesman, noted the robustness of the new country and its strong social and community ties. He saw people helping out people due to their relationships and the social ties they had with each other. These voluntary associations formed the bedrock and spirit of volunteerism in the United States. Fast forward several hundred years, and an ethic of service is a strong part of the social fabric of our time. Volunteering in nonprofit organizations has been the subject of many a book, article, and report. Some of the more recent statistics point to the fact that last year alone, according to the Corporation for National and Community Service, over 62 million people volunteered, which translates to 7.9 billion hours of service. Almost 3/4 of where that volunteering occurred was in an education, social service, or religious setting. This gives me great hope and pride knowing that there are people who see beyond the daily activities of life to give of their time and energies for something they believe in. Now, our discussion this week centered on how nonprofit organizations recruit and develop a strong volunteer base. With volunteer recruitment, there are those organizations such as hospitals and other large organizations who have a large volunteer base, but what of the small and medium-sized nonprofit that relies on volunteers to carry out their programs? One of the first things that nonprofit leaders need to consider is the motivations of why people volunteer in the first place. And a major reason is that someone simply asked them to. Being direct and just asking someone to help is perhaps the most common way for people to get involved. There are, of course, other motivations, such as people caring about an issue, or they seek recognition, or have a personal sense of calling to serve, or maybe they just want experience. Whatever it is about getting help for an organization. Now, volunteer recruiting, as this is known, is no guarantee that someone will be effective as a volunteer, only that they are willing, which is a big part of the battle. It is the next part of volunteering, volunteer development or training, that is important. How can you, as a nonprofit leader, ensure that a volunteer is working within their capacity to help the organization? What about volunteer burnout, or those for which it's clear that they need to let someone else take on the role? Ensuring that volunteers are given not just tasks to do, but made to feel important, and that their contributions are recognized, are some of the easiest ways to develop or build capacities in volunteers. It all starts with defining what specific role they will play in an organization. Let's start with the most basic of volunteers, the board. Having things like a board manual, knowing how much time will be spent in meetings, outlining the board's role and expectations are all necessary mechanisms to ensure an effective board. With other volunteers, it is the same, and one way of doing this is having a document like a volunteer job description that outlines time commitment and other expectations. Those can all be beneficial. Nonprofit leaders also need to take into account volunteer capacities that they already have and ensure that it matches up with the needs of the organization. Things like skills and language can come into play and used to help the nonprofit. One example that I have on this is the story of an immigrant mom who was asked by a teacher to help out with translating some school lessons into another language. As she volunteered for the project, which only took a few minutes a day as she dropped off her son at school, she eventually was asked to do longer lessons and stayed on a bit longer at school. At the same time, she asked other immigrant parents, which she knew, to help out, as she did. The school began to invest resources into this parent volunteer effort, and over time, this parent volunteer effort grew to where the school now has a end-of-the-year cultural celebration that celebrates volunteers and the contributions of all the families. Whatever the situation or context, volunteers are the backbone of any nonprofit organization, and it's always a reminder to take all volunteer efforts seriously. The final aspect of volunteering is for nonprofits to regularly recognize and celebrate volunteers, appreciating all the efforts, whether that is a formal event like an awards dinner, or a simple recognition in a way that resonates with the person. Whatever it is, it needs to be built into the culture of the nonprofit. There are several resources and sites that gives ideas on ways to appreciate volunteers, and the bottom line is that it is done. There's a quote that says, "Volunteering is the ultimate exercise in democracy." You vote in elections once a year, but when you volunteer, you vote every day about the kind of community you want to live in. So if you're asked, then consider service and honoring your talents. It's one of the best ways to make a difference. Our next module will have us take a look at the makeup of a board, and what does it mean to have a diverse board, and the strength from having different backgrounds and perspectives represented. One final note is, since we are halfway through our course, I want to give you an opportunity to share what is and what isn't working for you in the course through the short survey thread right after this one. Do you have a suggestion or ideas that you want to discuss? I know I have some ideas for the second half of the course, which I will share next week, but please do take the time to answer a short survey where it says "feedback needed" on the thread. This will help me make any adjustments to our time together. I value your input, and the survey is anonymous. As always, attend to our discussion as we wrap up this module through the weekend, and I'll see you all online.